expect an update on the cost of living this Tuesday when Statistics Canada releases its Consumer Price Index for January. Canada's annual inflation rate rose slightly to 3.4% in December as prices for a lot of things, including food and rent, remain stubbornly high. The Bank of Canada will also be watching this update closely while it considers when it'll be able to start cutting interest rates. Governor Tiff Macklem has said more evidence that inflation is heading towards its 2% target is needed for that to happen. So what economic indicators should we be watching for this week? With me now to talk about all of that is Stephen Poloz. He is the former Bank of Canada governor and now special advisor at Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt. And John Manley is here as well, former Liberal finance minister and current senior advisor at Bennett Jones. Hello to both of you. Great to have you both back. I appreciate you making the time. Mr. Poloz, I'll start with you. We're looking ahead to what Statistics Canada will tell us about January when it comes to inflation. Mm-hmm. In your estimation, do you think it will be as sticky as it has been in the past few months?
Well, that's a pretty hard forecast to make. The data, as you know, are never going in a straight line. Mm-hmm. We know what the tendency is, and so we're going to have months that disappoint us and others that are good ones. And I think if you look back over the last 12 months, actually 8 or so of the last 12 prints have been lower than expected by the street. And I think that's the tendency I'm looking for to continue, that inflation actually outperforming, because 70% of the inflation episode we've been through has been supply side disturbances, not demand side disturbances. And they're always hard to sort out in the data. They just kind of happen, fall in your lap as they resolve. And they also happen to, as they resolve, they cause the economy to pick up speed as opposed to slowing down. So it's doubly confusing. And so right now, I wouldn't want to bet on whether we get a 3.1 or a 3.2 this week, but I'll bet it'll be something like that.
Okay, and Mr. Manley, your thoughts on whether you think that trend that Mr. Poloz identified will probably be seen through?
No, I think that's right. I think the other data that we're seeing is that increasingly those supply constraints, both in supply chains and actual products in the marketplace, are being alleviated. And as we all know, during COVID, there was lots of money going out, and people were putting it in their pockets or their bank accounts. And now what we're seeing is that they are actually able to spend it.
So how does that inform the calculation upon which many Canadians are looking to right now, which is when are rates going to start to be cut? How important is that inflation number in informing that decision right now?
Well, it's really important, at least from a financial market standpoint, because as you know, everybody's making a bet on when that will happen. But how that translates into what rates that really matter to people, that's a whole lot simpler. Like, it's going to take longer for that to happen. And so I think that what we want to watch for is accumulation of positive information from the inflation side and the economy kind of holding its own as opposed to going for sure into recession. As that happens, the bonds should rally at the shorter end of the market, and that's the sort of thing that would give the central banks more confidence to lower rates.
Can I follow up really quickly with you and ask how difficult a call that is to make? I just feel like in this environment, you keep hearing about the possibility of overshooting and the impact that could have on the economy, and then everything you just spelled out. How difficult is that decision?
Extremely difficult. So you're onto something. And like I said, to give you an idea, if you said inflation would be somewhere between 1 and 3 a year from now with 2 as the target, that might not be good enough because there's too much risk that it will be significantly above 2. And so with the uncertainty, both because of where inflation came from and how the economy is reacting to higher interest rates, we can see lots of pain out there. You probably saw the Canadian Tire's results yesterday. Mm-hmm. Canadian Tire is in recession, so a lot of its customers are in recession. And so that tells us something that, the economy, even if at the top it looks okay, underneath there's plenty of pain being borne. And that means we got another year of this, even if we're at the turning point.
So let me turn it for a second then, Mr. Manley, to politics, because someone who now occupies the position you did a number of years ago could be tabling the federal budget within the next number of weeks or within the next month. How difficult a situation does that present for the federal government, and how mindful are they going to have to be about spending? Well,
there's 2 parts to that. Vashi, how mindful should they be and how mindful will they be? I'm the old curmudgeon that balance the budget back in the day. And I've been worrying about the amount of spending for several years on your show and others, because I just think that as you watch that accumulated debt build up, the burden of paying the interest on it becomes heavier and heavier. So we'll see in a few weeks, but I'm not expecting that there's going to be lots of language around it for sure. They'll talk about we're doing better than other countries and this and that, but the reality is that most of our additional spending that's been layered on, we've been creating programs. It's mostly consumption. It's not an investment side, so it will not contribute to growth. So how we fix all that is probably going to be waiting till after the next election.
In your view, Mr. Poloz, I'll give the last word to you. Is there an economic imperative when you take into account some of the arguments that Mr. Manley rightly pointed out the government puts forward, for example, our relative balance sheet compared to other countries, our relative debt load compared to other countries, particularly in the OECD or even among the G7. Is there, in your view, an economic imperative for them to exercise more restraint?
Well, I think there is, at least to lay it out in a framework that indicates how the restraint will play in the future. It may be very difficult, as John says, especially since if the economy is already sort of falling into a shallow, let's say, recession, revenues are going to slow even more, even if there are no initiatives to take. So the deficit may be widening as we sit here. And when you position that against the fiscal deficit, how much of it is productive, right? I'd like to point to, childcare as an expense, which is an investment that'll pay for itself. But there aren't too many of those that you can point to in our picture yet, and perhaps maybe there will be more of that. And if that's the case, then you might say, well, they're a little bit of a check mark, which is good. It'll promote growth and therefore generate revenues in future, but not if it's labeled as consumption, as John just said.
Understood. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much, both of you, for making the time for the conversation and for your analysis today. I appreciate it. John Manley and Stephen Poloz.
Pleasure.